Hello viewers and welcome to yet another Warhammer 40,000 Conquest video production. My name is Mitch and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today I'm honored to present another very special installment in my series of community spotlight videos in which I had the opportunity to sit down and speak with one of the most competent players in our entire LCG community, the very same gentleman who recently took Nazdreg and the Orcs faction to the semifinals of the 2015 Conquest LCG World Championship, Elliott Dawson. Specifically, we discuss how he got started with Conquest, we engage in a very thorough discussion of his rather unique Nazdreg deck list, and we chat about why he chose the warlord he did, given the context of our current metagame. And of course, he provides both wisdom and advice to anyone hoping to become a more competitive, competent player. So, if you enjoy this video, remember to hit the like button, ensure you're subscribed, and you're encouraged to share, because the more engagement this video receives, the more viewers are reached, and ever the broader you help grow our Conquest community. But with our introduction aside, I'm pleased to bring you an interview with someone who made the top 4 of our 2015 Conquest LCG World Championship, Elliott Dawson. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, but before you share with us your rather unique but enormously competitive Orc faction deck list, why don't you start by introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about how you're personally involved in the Conquest community?
Sure. My name is Elliott Dawson. I'm a Conquest player from Omaha, Nebraska. I've been playing Conquest since just right after Worlds last year. I watched Worlds live, and after that I kind of got hooked on the game, really wanted to try it out myself, but given the circumstances, I kind of fell into it. I didn't really go out and buy everything all at once. The community in the, I should say, kind of our Midwest area is basically composed of a pretty tight-knit group of people. A lot of the Conquest events that are held out here in Omaha see a lot of the same guys, and we sometimes get people from around the area as well. Sam Mann comes up quite frequently and plays at a lot of our events.
Awesome.
He's, I think, pretty well known in the community at this point.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, we also, I've seen people from Chicago and the Denver area as well make it down and, participate at some of our events, some of the store champs, some of the regionals so far. So the Conquest community here is pretty good. It's, had some better times. It's been a bit of a lull lately just because, leading up to Worlds and getting that new box seemed like it was going to take longer than usual.
Right.
But after that came out, we did have ourselves another store tournament before Worlds, and we had a pretty decent turnout for that. So it was some good practice too, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, it certainly sounds like you've come a long way from just watching the World Championships to recently attending and completely blowing away our community, taking our player base by storm by making the top 4 piloting a Nazdreg deck. So that's a very bold move of you to bring the Orcs to Worlds. Why exactly did you decide on Nazdreg? Like, what was your thought process behind that?
So, kind of going back to the beginning, why Nazdreg? When I said I was interested in Conquest, I definitely wanted to play the game, but when I started out, I wasn't financially able to buy my way into the Conquest arena, so
Sure.
I live with a gentleman. Some people might know him. He's a decent Conquest player, one of the best that we have here in Omaha. and he plays a lot of FFG games with me. And my roommate Brian, who bought into Conquest when it first came out, basically allowed me to enjoy the experience with him. I like to make it a joke. He pretty much dove right into the game, and he was loving all the factions, and I basically got to pick up the remains of what was left over. And given the choice between Astra Militarum and Orc, I went with Orc. I went with the greenskins. I didn't want to play with those. They just seem so bland. That military faction. I mean, who would really want to play with that when you can just destroy and smash things all game long? So I decided on Orc from there. And to be perfectly honest, haven't bought into the game until the Tyranid expansion came out. And it was always my intention from the get-go, after looking at all the factions and not really being exposed to the, I should say, the lore of Warhammer, that Tyranid was the faction I wanted to play. But given, we only had 7 currently available, Orc just seemed like they were kind of the next best step before that. So, I started piloting Orc right away, day one. Right when I played my first match, it was a slaughter fest. I got my butt kicked I don't know how many times. I really didn't understand why I couldn't win command or win planets, but I just stuck with it and kept modifying and tweaking the deck after each store championship and each event. And it just led me to come up with a regional deck that I kind of regret I did not copy my deck list down and post at an earlier time. Orcs did take me to the regional. That is what I won with at the Omaha Store Regional Championship. And it was only about 8 players there. I will say they were the best of our local meta, though. These are the guys who helped me prepare for Worlds. A couple of them went with me to Worlds this past Worlds, and my hat's off to them. They have kicked my butt enough times and taken it all on the chin through most of the events that I've won, and really helped me come out on top on creating a better Orc deck. It's something I've been working on for the past year.
Well, I mean, it certainly sounds like it, and it definitely seems as though you've come a long way from your humble beginnings as just the core set Orcs, and I'm sure it's been a very much an uphill battle trying to get the faction to perform, but I know myself and probably everyone else there at Worlds, witnessing the tournament or watching online, was probably rooting for you and Nazdreg to take the championship, but top 4 by no means, is anything to be ashamed of. Absolutely fantastic performance. But just in assessing the deck itself, I'll do a real quick overview before we delve into the specifics. It's, of course, an Orc faction deck with Nazdreg as your chosen warlord. It's only 26 army units, 4 attachments, 11 events, and 9 supports. I suppose, just in regard to the Orcs and Nazdreg, what kind of player would enjoy running this kind of deck? Like, what does it do well?
So that's a very interesting question. I think what it does well is it helps you deal indirectly with the problems that Orcs have. And a lot of those problems are command, winning such, and it's changed, I'll say, so much throughout this season with the release of each pack. I can remember the deck going through significant changes, but I think you would probably have the most fun with this deck if you're looking for the long game. This is something that has the potential to rush, but it's really designed to give you outs, to give you the opportunity to compete with a lot of the Kato and Kith decks that can really play out the full 7-planet spread. And what I found with my early iterations of this deck when it was a lot beefier and a lot less dedicated to the command struggle was I could easily rush out any faction and take those first, 3 to 4 planets. But after that, it was an uphill struggle to compete with, an Eldar player who has 12 cards in their hand or a Space Marine who's now sitting on 8 to 9 resources. So if you enjoy playing longer games, I definitely think this is an Orc deck that's well-rounded enough to get you to that full planet 7 spread.
Yeah, well, I think it's definitely a little unconventional to just see a slower, more control-style orc deck, but I suppose just in breaking down the specifics, because there's certainly a lot of interesting inclusions in this deck, a lot of interesting numbers of different cards. It's kind of surprising seeing some of these in a smaller quantity than I would normally expect, and there's definitely some intriguing omissions as well. But first up, we've got the 26 army units like I mentioned before. We have 3 copies of the Evil Sun's Warbiker. Some of these units there's not too much to say about, but what is the primary role that the Warbikers play in this deck?
They're the punch. The deck originally had a lot of strong units in it. You could swing for 4 to the original deck was running about 2 Goth Knobs, so you could swing up to sometimes 13 damage. This is obviously I'd like to call it a light orc deck. There's not a lot of big guys in this deck. And the Evil Suns give you that really, cheap 2-cost command, but swinging for 4, 5 if you trigger off a Brutal is really what the deck needed to be able to hit those bigger units that you come across.
Right. Well, I've got a couple German friends that call the Evil Sun's Warbiker and similar units the Warlord Friends, and we see another version of that in the 1-cost Talarn Raiders. So it's 1 command, 0 attack, 2 hit points, and just like the Evil Sun's Warbiker, it gets +2 attack while it's at the same planet as a Warlord. Are you using that for, I assume, a very similar role?
That is actually in there solely for the 1 cost of the units. It's nice if it does get the 2 attack, but obviously you're kind of left high and dry if you're in the situation where you commit it to a first planet and neither you or the enemy warlord commits there. So primarily that unit was in the deck for 2 reasons. The first being that it's just a cheap 1 cost with a command icon. The second is, and this is pretty important to a lot of the units in the deck, is it had the additional hit point. It had that 2 HP,
right,
where I could Orc Cannon a planet where, say, there was a Rogue Trader or a Void Pirate that my opponent had, and he could soak the damage while my opponent has to decide, okay, is this really going to be worth, getting an extra resource or card, or do I need to spend a shield?
Right. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. And speaking of Rogue Traders and Void Pirates, you've got both of those in this deck. They're, of course, 1 cost, 1 command, 0 attack, 1 hit point. They either grant you a resource or a card bonus, but you only include 2 copies of each. I suppose, what's your rationale behind that?
So I tried running the deck with all the command. When I started tweaking this deck after regional, I basically wanted to turn it into a command deck. Something, where if I can't win command, I can at least deny it from my opponent.
Right.
What I really came across is with, and we'll be talking about these cards, I'm sure, momentarily, but with all of the weird boys and the Daka in my deck, it was actually becoming more of a setback having too many of those one hit point guys committed to planets. And while the one card, I think some people could question that because there's the ammo depots in the deck. Why not, switch it out for an additional resource? There's just been too many times where if you get card locked, I mean, to me, that's harder than being resource locked. With resources, usually you can get four and play out most of what you have, especially in this deck where a lot of the cost is so low. But I felt the balance was really needed there in order to sufficiently get what you needed to compete at the planets.
Sure. Well, unsurprisingly, for an AM allied deck, we've got 3 copies of the Iron Guard recruits. So they're 2 cost, 2 command, 1 attack, and once again we see another 2 hit point unit. I suppose anything else to mention about these guys?
Yeah, a lot of people, well, in my local meta before I came out, we were talking about, these guys and comparing them to the sanctioned Psyker unit.
Right.
And I'm sure a lot of people look at the deck and they're like, you're running Nazdreg. Why don't you just, throw in those guys? You can beef them up and swing like crazy. That's you will rarely find these guys fighting alongside Nazdreg at any given planet. They are there to win you command on the planet so you can send your warlords somewhere else. So really having that one attack seems so trivial, but when your opponent warlord commits to the planet and you can at least swing for that one, it sometimes gives you just that one extra damage that you need to throw on a unit to get a complete board reset, which this deck is very capable of with all of the applied damage.
Right. Well, I guess the first example of applied direct damage, we've got 3 copies of the Weird Boy Maniac. So it's a cost of 3, 1 command, 2 attack, 4 hit points, and reaction. After this unit enters play, deal 1 damage to each other unit at this planet. I'm sure that must have been just extremely useful given the Kith concentration at Worlds. But I suppose, what are your thoughts on the Weird Boy?
Yeah, the Weird Boy is definitely, that is the Orcs Archon's Terror. That is, our special trump card. That's what we hang on to when we need to win the battle at the planet. It's not really an attrition card. If you're playing a Weird Boy just to put 1 damage on everything at a planet, it's not being played correctly. You should be playing this as a finisher, as a shield siphon for your opponent. You want to bait out cards in their hand with it. If you can't do that, I mean, you shouldn't be playing it, plain and simple. This should be also one of the last cards that you look to play at the end of the turn. So slow playing as much as you can and sitting on those 3 resources is really key. I'll say during Worlds, 6 of my matches were against Dark Eldar players, and I won half of those. So I won 3 and I lost 3. The 3 matches that I did lose to Dark Eldar were to, they were only against 2 people, and both of those Dark Eldar players made it into the top 16. Yeah, so all I can really say about that is this was a key card in pretty much every single one of those matches.
Well, I mean, I can only assume that just by waiting as long as possible, you get the absolute utmost value out of this card, and the same thing I'm sure goes for Daka. But, an orc staple. Up next, we have the Snakebite Thug. It's a cost of 2. It has 1 command, 3 attack, 4 hit points, and after it resolves its attack, it deals itself 1 point of damage in a kind of control-style orc deck. How do you typically use the Snakebite?
The Snakebite is Again, the one of those punch cards, the Evil Sons, was part of, this problem of, well, how do I damage these big unit guys? I'm not dropping anything that really costs that much. And the Snakebite is a perfect niche card for that. For 2 resources, you're competing on command. You have this big buff guy, but I think where he really shines is having that stout amount of 4 hit points. You can cannon this guy up to a potential 6 swing with Nazdreg. And on any given turn that you have the battle initiative, being able to swing that damage onto him, just triggering it off his effect, and then Craft Tooth Haul is a major play that, you can always rely on.
Well, definitely. And how about next? We've got 4 copies of your signature army unit. So Nazdreg's Flash Gits, their cost of 3, 1 command, 2 attack, 4 hit points, and their combat action, limit once per phase, is to deal themselves 1 damage as a cost paid to ready that unit. How do you just try to get the most value out of your signature army?
So these guys, I also like using the brutal ability. I mean, they're meant to fight with Nazdreg for very obvious reasons. Being able to leverage that damage is just a huge swing when you can go for 2 and then another potential 3 in 1 round with 1 unit. But something I tried to do to sort of augment them is making sure I had the proper mobility to get them to Nazdreg and fighting with him wherever possible. So as we'll see later on, the supports and the other units are kind of put in this deck specifically to get these units into the fight when I need them.
Right. Well, I mean, there's scarcely a better example of mobility than your 2 copies of Boss Zugnog, so something that came out in that Great Devourer box. It's a 4 cost, unique orc, 1 command, it's loyal, 4 attack, 4 hit points, and combat action is you target 2 orc army units at the same planet as Boss Zugnog, which could be himself, it could be other orcs. You deal them 1 damage, and then you move them to the first planet, but you can only do that once per phase. I suppose what, is the biggest appeal behind this very powerful unit here?
So, uh, first thing when I saw this card was, oh my god, it costs 4 resources. I'm never gonna want to play this guy. I don't care if he's a 4/4 with the command. I mean, the command icon, I'm like I scoffed at it. I'm like, that should be 2 at least. What's going on with this guy? But I realized that even though I could put out 2 teleporter pads for the cost of a Zugnog, really his effect triggered with another orc is still giving you that, 2 teleporter pad significance.
Right.
And it's also a command icon that's actually sitting at a planet. It's not, a support card that just sits back and does nothing for you.
Yeah.
The damage, again, very significant, being able to brutalize. And, sometimes it's very important to be able to damage your own units as orcs. And this is another one of those great just clutch cards where I need to find a way to craft tooth on this planet, but I'm attacking first. I can't get that Chimera token, or I can't get that 1 hit point left unit off the board I need to get off the board. So this gives you kind of one of those outs, another way of just bouncing things around and getting more brutal. It's really, Zugnog might be a really good personification of what this deck can do. It can bounce you around. It doesn't get routed. It just keeps coming back and keeps fighting, and it hurts your guys, but for all the right reasons.
Right. I mean, it even allows you to, just like the teleporter pad, to always have a little bit of pressure on the first planet, where your opponent, if they don't put anything there, they run the risk of you can just dump any orc, at this planet to the first planet and just win combat entirely uncontested.
To very much success in a couple of the games I played, yeah.
Sure. Well, another kind of strange inclusion here is one single copy of the Rugged Killicans. So 4 cost, 2 command, 2 attack, 5 hit points, no war gear attachments, and it's brutal, so it doesn't have to rely on Nazdreg, but what's up behind just one copy?
Yeah, one copy of the Killicans. This was kind of, I got to the point where I I had a spot for a card in the deck, and everything I had was in there. I went down to one teleporter pad. I got down to, the 2 of each of the Rogue Trader and the Void Pirate. And, I was looking at a bunch of the Orc cards and really what benefits me here. And I had something like Goff Knob and, a great, great Orc card. But something like that just so easily gets destroyed by things like Clavex.
Right.
It really came down to what unit did I want that was going to fill out what the rest of my units couldn't do. And what that was a guy who could benefit off of Nazdreg without Nazdreg. I wanted to be able to do everything my deck was supposed to do. I want to Orc Cannon my own guys to give them more damage. I want a custom field generator and brutal them up and swing for all this damage. And the Killicans can do that whether or not I got my Warlord fighting right beside them. So all of these great Orc cards just synergize right onto them, and that's the reason I decided just to fill out sort of that last unit spot with a copy of them.
Sure. Well, I suppose just because I didn't ask before, how exactly do you go about using Nazdreg as a unit? Like, where do you normally send him? And when do you decide that you really need that brutal keyword from him?
Yeah, the brutal keyword actually doesn't come into play surprisingly a lot with this deck. You can usually leverage a lot of the support you have, a lot of the support cards to, set yourself up for easy victories at most of the planets. When his ability does come into play is usually when you go up against these very contentious warlords like Ragnar, like Nurgle. If you have a Chimera Den out, well, I guess no, that would be more Chimeras and less Warlord fighting. But those Warlords that do like to get into your face and swing a lot. With the brutal keyword, you can scare off a lot of, battles, a lot of Warlords from wanting to commit to a fight, because even though your guys are heavily damaged, your opponent knows with 1 or 2 shields, you're not dying, you're getting more pissed off, and you're going to swing back even harder.
Right. Well, I suppose just in continuing along through the cards of your deck, we've got 4 attachments, 3 copies of promotion. If everybody should probably know by now, but 0 cost, 1 shield, limited, attached unit gains 2 command icons. Anything worth adding to promotion?
Not really. Promotion is in there for pretty much the same reason it is for every deck. You're winning your command, and it's a great tempo play to get yourself, to hand size 3 for Ammo Depot, or just that extra command to win the planet. There's, really nothing special about it.
Sure. Well, you've got your signature attachment, the Cyborg Bodies, so 1 cost, 3 shields, you stick it to an army unit, you double the HP. Are you generally using this as shields, or are you using it as an attachment?
This is a 3 shield card, and that's all it is in this deck. Using it for anything else, I feel, would be a grave misplay. I mean, the niche for this actually being useful when applied to a unit is almost non-existent. I will say in my previous regional deck, Cyborg would leave me with some pretty tough decisions to make. But in the current state of the game, especially with Clavexes, it's not worth playing usually, even at one resource. It's pretty much a 3 shield that is in the deck because it's a signature squad.
Sure. I mean, Goth Knob, Cyborg Body, and Mork's Great Heap. It's awesome having like a 14 hit point unit, but Clavex War Leader doesn't mind that too much.
No, not at all.
I suppose we've got 11 events in total. First up, we've got 3 copies of Suppressive Fire, 0 cost, 1 shield, exhaust a unit you control to exhaust a non-warlord unit. I suppose, what are you typically targeting with this card?
So Suppressive Fire it's kind of the last card I switched out to replace for my 2-shield Battle Cry. Battle Cry was a card that, while the effect looks great on paper, even at a 2-shield, a Suppressive Fire, being 1 shield less, can afford you the opportunity of not taking so much more damage. With this card, I would normally target something such as an Honor Librarian. I the name's escaping me, but anything essentially that I could exhaust for 3 or more attack would usually be what I would use a Suppressive Fire to target. Because essentially, if you can, swing down a 3 attack unit and I only have to swing down a Rogue Trader or a Void Pirate, that's essentially increasing a 1 shield card to a 3 shield card. And that's pretty much why I was running 3 of those in the deck.
Well, I mean, that definitely makes sense when you phrase it like that, and I suppose Battle Cry doesn't do too awful much just against, a big army of token units or low-cost units. Not that you've got anything that hits horribly hard in this deck, but it's all decent enough. We've also got 3 copies of Daka, so it's 2 cost, 2 shields. Deploy action is exhaust your warlord to deal 1 damage to each unit. I've got a suspicion that this is probably a later game play, but what exactly do you do with this card, and when do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, it's a solid 2 shield. Between this and Battle Cry, I would find myself in more situations where I was wishing, I had a Daka in hand rather than I really wish I had a Battle Cry. A Daka is definitely a mid to a late game card that you would play. And really you have to play with it in mind throughout the entire game. It's not something you can draw and be like, okay, all right, I need to try to start setting up a Daka now. I'll say in the last store tournament I played in before I went up to Worlds, I was playing in a game against a Dark Eldar player, and I basically saw this planet coming up where the game was going to end, and my opponent was sending, all of his units there. And it's like, yeah, it'd be great if I could get a Weird Boy, but I haven't seen one yet. And I know there's a Daka in my deck. That'd be great too. So we wound up fighting at this planet before it even came up. And what I wound up doing was actually spreading my damage everywhere. And, he probably wasn't thinking too much about the Daka then. But, as I'm swinging away with all my units, basically just throwing them away, I didn't retreat after the first battle. I wanted to get as much damage out there on his units as I could. He was, throwing shields out to keep pretty much everything alive. And what it did come down to is when I was able to pull off that Daka, it was effectively a board clear for me. And when that happens, all those shields that you invested to keep your units alive, I mean, really, you're just throwing them away. And I know we've all had those games where you're fighting a battle at a planet and you're doing the math in your head. You're like, okay, if I shield this 4 attack with this 2 shield, I'll still be alive. I'll have initiative. I'll get first swing. And all I have to do is make sure I target this guy with my attack, and you're doing it all in your head. And then when it doesn't pan out that way, some of us go, well, shoot, that was the wrong move. Or sometimes we catch it before we, make the mistake, and we're like, actually, can I take that back? I want to retreat here because I'm just throwing away shields if I keep my unit here. That's essentially what you have to work for with Daka. You have to put your opponent in this position where they're throwing away their shields. They don't know they're throwing away their shields. They're using them to save their units. And you have to make sure, that you're ready to just completely take everything out. Because a Nazdreg exhausted is definitely a highly, highly risky move. I've had him bloodied once or twice because of this single event, but I'll be honest, it's usually something when you play it, it's very much worth the cost.
Sure. Well, I suppose on the topic of whether it's worth the cost or not, next we've got 3 copies of the rather divisive Squigify. It's a cost of 3, it's another 2 shield card, and it's combat action. You target a non-vehicle army unit, and then until the end of the phase, that unit's attack value is locked at 1, and its printed text box is basically blank. I suppose, under what circumstance do you feel that is worth the resources?
Well, I had 3 separate occurrences come up actually at the tournament. Twice in the Worlds and once in the World Eater the day before. And the situation that you find yourself in usually is you're staring down and looking at this huge monster on your opponent's side of the field. For Space Marines, it's the Honored Librarian with Catachan Outpost for days. For Chaos, you're looking at maybe a Possessed or a Khorne Berserker, or something that just gets to, Warlord kill potential. And it's those types of units that you have to save for and decide, okay, am I going to, cripple this guy and take him out of the fight? Or am I just going to try to shield the attack and swing back even harder? And I think one of the hardest decisions with Squigify isn't whether or not you're reducing that unit down. It's whether or not that unit's actually going to be able to escape the battle. Because keep in mind, if you do Squigify something and you don't have the units to basically kill it off, it's just going to retreat back to HQ and be a problem at the next planet or the next, major battle. So making sure you Squigify something and have the leverage to finish it off, to take it off the board, that's really the most important thing about that card. 85% of the time you'll be using it as a 2 shield, but when your opponent does have that really strong character, or army unit I should say, that's going to be something you're definitely going to want to use this card on. I will say not a lot of Dark Eldar players run those sorts of units, so this is definitely something you'd see more in a matchup against, say, like Kato or Nurgle or Zerathir.
Yeah, well, I mean, just assessing the faction breakdown for Worlds, it was 32% Space Marines, so I'm sure you definitely had plenty of appetitive targets. A Shrieking Harpy or something like that is also just a fantastic selection for Squigify. You don't have Crush Face in this deck, I suppose because you play a longer game, but you do, of course, have 2 copies of Biga is Beta. It's your signature event, 0 cost, 1 shield. Interrupt, when you deploy an orc, you drop its cost by 2, and then deal it 1 damage. I suppose, is there much to say about this event?
I think there is. Only because it came to my attention during this tournament, and I don't think a lot of people will find this too hard to believe, but a lot of my opponents were kind of, tilting their heads and scratching behind their ears like, I don't quite remember what that card does. Wait, what can orcs do again? And this is really one of those cards that, catch them off by surprise. I I will say my opponent on at the end of the Swiss round was Varun, the current world's champion.
Right.
And this was one of those cards I was kind enough to remind him, hey, we actually have this awesome cost reducer, because he was under the impression that there were no more like moves I could do. And that was actually a really fun game where I was basically educating him on everything orc. But Big is Beta is also, they I was told not to watch myself at Worlds, but it was too late. After watching my match and listening to some of the commentators, like one of the final moves I had at the planet, it was very foregone at that point, though. I was like, well, there's nothing he can really draw into here, and Big as Beta is one of those cards that, yeah, I can actually draw this and drop a really good unit into this planet, and I might be able to take it. So it plays really great with Ammo Depot. It drops your hand size fast and gets guys out there and gives you those resources that a lot of orcs are needing.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said before, if you need damaged units, it does that as well. So, of course, it's a signature event, but I suppose it goes along perfectly with Nazdreg. But now that we've covered your 11 events, we still have these supports. We have a grand total of 9 between 5 different supports. First up, you've mentioned it a time or two by now, we've got Ammo Depot. So 3 copies, 1 cost. You exhaust that support to draw 1 card, but the qualifiers, you have to have 3 or fewer cards in your hand. So a lot of players like to draw cards. I suppose, just what are your thoughts on Ammo Depot?
It is a card that I fought for a long time. When it first came out, I was stuck in my orcish ways, and I didn't want anything to do with it. I'm like, no, I'm playing these big orc units. I'm playing these 3-4 cost guys. I'm never going to be able to play an Ammo Depot. I don't care if I'm dropping shields left and right. My units are big, and I'm never going to be able to play that card. I will say in this Worlds, I played it probably at least half of the time. And I don't mean that as in I dropped the card. I mean actually, after I put it out there, I was able to put it to some use. There are a few games where I'll drop it. My opponent being, a Worlds competitor realizes, okay, I can't cut off his cards. I'm going to attempt to shut down his resources, in which case, I might go through the rest of the game without using another Ammo Depot. But it is one of those cards that just keeps you in the game. With the absence of it, being card locked with this deck, you would not win. You could not have the low cost, even though they have high command, the low cost units that are in this deck and beat another player, consistently. Ammo Depot is definitely a card that's needed in order to maintain the pressure and the momentum that you need to build up with this deck.
Right. Well, and you mentioned before, you've of course got 3 copies of Orc Cannon, so it's 1 cost. You exhaust it during combat, target a planet. Your opponent deals 1 indirect damage to his or her units, and you do the same. I suppose, how do you just try to get the most benefit out of Orc Cannon and stop it from becoming a liability?
Yeah, Orc Cannon, if people don't know, you do not have to target a planet that a battle is taking place at.
Right.
You can target any planets with any number of units, yours or your opponent's. And this is a card that really gives any sort of edge to the orcs winning their command struggle, in my opinion. You want to knock off the cheap, low HP units as soon as you can. This is something that is supposed to bait out shield cards from your opponent to lower their hand size, to make sure, during the next fight, they're not going to have exactly as many shields as they need, or if any, and it's going to ensure that, the next command phase, you have one more unit at that planet than your opponent does. This is also a card that is essential for Nazdreg's ability. When you teleport a pad, Evil Sun's Warbiker to the planet, to the first planet with Nazdreg, and you Orc Cannon that unit because you want to swing for 5 damage instead of 4,
right,
because you're afraid your opponent has a 3 shield card. This is the card that does that consistently. It just always gives you the opportunity to swing for extra damage. And really, that's how I find myself using it, both to control command, to control my opponent's hand size and content, and to actually help win battles and swing for more damage. It's just really the best utility card I feel there is in the Orc deck.
Well, I've, definitely heard its praises sung before, and, it's a good card. It makes perfect sense in this deck. Go figure. But next, we have 3 different supports, all of which we see 1 copy for. We've mentioned it before. It's the support version of Boss Zugnog. It's the Teleporta Pad. It's a cost of 2 combat action as you exhaust it to move any orc unit to the first planet. I suppose apart from just putting a little bit of pressure on the first planets, how do you get the most use out of this?
So I didn't run Teleporta Pad for a very long time. This was one of the cards I felt was going to be necessary in order to deal with the Dark Eldar. What would you call it? I don't know. Wave that took over Worlds. Although it doesn't show that much in the actual tournament numbers, I suppose. Like I said, 6 of my matches were against Dark Eldar, and without this card, I probably wouldn't have won at least one of them. This is a card that easily counters Archon's Terror. It helps dealing with really a lot of tricky battle situations. And it's also just one of those cards that is what I like, even at a 2 cost, to be a nice tempo play. It throws something out that messes up your opponent's way of thinking. It's not one of those cards that, you look across from and you're like, okay, I know what he's going to do with that. You look at it and you're like, well, crap, I don't really know how to do my command layout now, and it really just throws a wrench into most people's plans.
I think I like, too, that it lets you kind of conserve your forces, like you can distribute your units more just command favorably, and then pile them on the first planet, like if you need to, as a response. So if your opponent does kind of chicken out Marty McFly style, you can potentially, reel in some extra cards or resources that you'd have otherwise foregone.
Yeah, it is essentially also my third Zugnog. I'm not a fan of dead drawing, and that is part of the reason I'm not running 3 Zugs and running 1 Teleporta Pad. It's also has the added benefit it doesn't damage the orcs that go to the first planet, in case I know I have to deal with more Klavex shenanigans.
Yeah. Well, and just like you said, you can target units in your HQ, whereas Zugnog can't do that. And I've certainly heard plenty of players use it to, go, surprise, Nazdreg is suddenly at the first planet, and now I'm swinging for 3 or 4 more than you were expecting. So, very nasty little card. And next, we've got Crack Tooth Hall. It's your signature support, cost of 2, combat action, exhaust it, move 1 damage from any unit you control to another target unit at that same planet. I suppose, apart from just laying waste to Chimera tokens, how do you use the Crack Tooth Hall?
So Cyborg Body is like the useless card. I hate to say useless, but for this deck and its purposes, it serves very little of a purpose. Craptooth is basically the inversion of that. This is the Chimera Den for orcs. This is a card where you see it, you try not to mulligan, I mean, unless you really have to, and you drop it. It helps you deal with so much. The ability to move damage is probably, one of the best abilities that there is currently in the game. Being able to leverage that with Orc Cannons and Boss Zugnogs and, Big as Beta really gives you the edge of not only taking out the low hit point units, such that Dark Eldar typically run, but also swinging on bigger guys and getting that last finishing blow to take them out. It's been something I've used both to great success in removing tokens as well as bloodying warlords.
Right. I mean, I guess I've recently had some bad play experiences against Solarite Avedis, and that would be a perfect response to get around somebody shielding a flying unit as well. So just a spectacular card. And then next, and our last card in this entire deck, we only have a single copy of the very wordy custom field generator. So it's a cost of 2. Once an orc unit you control is assigned attack damage, you tap that support, you prevent all the damage, and then you redistribute that attack damage that would have been dealt among any orc units you control at that same planet. And it's indirect damage, so it can't be greater than the number of remaining hit points on whatever orc units you target. But I suppose, what are your thoughts behind just one copy of this card?
Oh, this is this is a support. I both love it and hate it. It is I should probably mention first why I hate this card, and then I'll go into explaining why I love it. But why I hate this card, and as most people listening probably know, is the Warlord Zarather. And a few of the people out here in the Omaha meta, as well as I'll mention again, Sam Mann, love playing their Chaos. And this is one of those cards that when it hits the field, I mean, you can see the grins on their faces. Like, they know when you reassign that damage, their day is about to get a whole lot better. So that's kind of why I dislike it. I'm also not really a fan with it against like many other warlords other than a chosen few. But the reason I love this card is because against those chosen few, this card is a godsend. And I'd like to point out exactly like which warlords I included this for.
Sure.
First off, Anshi. He was pretty big in the meta out in Omaha right after he was released, well into regional season. And I think I was running about 2 custom field generators at the time of regionals. And what that allows you to do is really deal with Armor Bane. Armor Bane was such a pain to have these huge orc units that you want to shield up and have them take a bunch of damage so they could swing back for even more damage, but you can't do that because Armor Bane.
Right.
So this was a card to kind of help deal with that. The other was Cato Sicarius. Cato Sicarius and his awesome fury. This is a card that helps you deal with those one-shot Catos who just like sneaking through an honored librarian damage and then finishing off your Killicans or your Flash Gits. Uh, Knowing that there's the potential for something like that to happen and being able to reassign the damage basically saves your units. It spreads it out, it makes it indirect, and there's no more indirect, there's no more crushing blow, there's no more Fury of Sicarius. Your orcs are fine, they're bloodied, and they're ready to bite someone's head off. The last warlord is actually the Dark Eldar. And the reason this was an include just to help deal with the Dark Eldar was, we're going to go back to it because it's such an amazing card, is the Klavex.
Right.
And being able to put the damage that's going to come through and damage your unit and get it killed by a Klavex for just one attack, being able to throw that damage onto Nazdreg or onto another unit that you'd rather have killed off, say something exhausted, is really a game changer. Even though it's, like a one attack tempo play, it is just invaluable to being able to dictate how the battle is going to unfold.
Well, I suppose now that we've kind of taken a look at the entire deck, I suppose overall, wrapping it all up in a nice, tidy bow, what exactly does this do the absolute best? Like, what are its areas of greatest strength?
I think what it really does best is win battles in really unconventional ways. You're going to be bouncing units around to different planets, usually to the first planet. You're going to be tapping out or squigifying units that get really big and beefy on your opponent's side. You're going to be destroying a lot of units with orc cannons and dakas and, taking shields out. Weird boy maniacs, you throw those in there too, just to add on to the pain. And I think that's really what this deck does best. You'll usually, if you're, playing the game and you're winning, what it usually looks like is you have a crap ton of orcs sitting in your HQ with damage on them. And that should signify that you're doing exactly what you need to be doing. And your opponent's side of the field should look like either his units are at full HP or they're dead. They shouldn't have any damage. If they do, you better have that Daka in your hand ready to play it.
Well, I suppose just kind of all together, how did this deck perform for you during the tournament? I mean, granted, you made it as far as the top 4. Everybody, well, at least me and everyone around me, was very much cheering for you to take the championship, including the game's designer. But, how did it do on such a ultra competitive level?
So, I basically put this deck together and brought it to Worlds because I decided Tyrannid wasn't going to be as competitive.
Right.
I was going to play Tyrannid or Orc. That's what it came down to. I looked at the card pool and I'm like, there's no way I can actually, be as competitive with Tyrannid. And although Best in Faction for Tyrannid sounded pretty good, I thought with my Nazdreg regional win, I kind of owed it a bit to him and to myself to see how far I could take this faction. And so that was pretty much my goal from the get-go. I did want to try to achieve top faction for Orc with this deck. And so, I put in the practice and put together the deck with, all the Katos and the Dark Eldars and the Eldoras in mind, to sort of compete. Not necessarily win, mind you. I didn't really go in with a mindset like, hey, I'm going to be at the top, the top 4 table, and I'll be playing all day, today and tomorrow. I kind of went in with a mentality that, I think this has a shot, and I think this is going to be pretty fun because I don't think I'm going to come across many Orc players. So I'll say the first round of the tournament was against Elliott Hedman, and if you check the roster, he finished in top 16 the following day. I think he was like maybe 8th or ninth. I'm not quite sure on the number. I feel kind of bad about that, but he soundly handed me my first loss. It was not a close game whatsoever. And, after that, I kind of, just said, all right, yeah, this is what I expected. I wasn't really feeling, down on myself or anything like that. And I asked him for another game right after. I'm like, would you mind? We finished so fast. I'd just like to play a bit and, get some more practice in. And he was totally okay with that. And we played another game, and I'll be perfectly honest, I don't even remember the outcome of it, but we were just having such a good time. It went by so fast, and as soon as I knew it, it was like I was sitting at the next table across from my next opponent, and I was just ready to go again. It wasn't, my losses aren't anything I really dwelled on during the tournament. And after that first round loss, I did not see another loss until the final round 7 against Varun, again the world champion now, and that was also an awesomely just fought and fun experience.
Well, I mean, that just sounds fantastic to me, and being able to shrug off, losses like it's just no big deal when there's some pretty significant stakes on the line. That's just fantastic. I mean, there was just incredible sportsmanship the entire event, and kudos to you for keeping your cool, keeping calm. I suppose just in taking a look at this deck, I've gotten a ton of questions, does anybody have Elliott's deck list? What was that Nazdreg guy running? Considering a lot of players are probably going to be net decking and copying this, let's say somebody shows up at their local meta and just starts stomping everybody into the dirt with this deck. How could somebody try to pick it apart? How might somebody try to overcome this Nazdreg deck you've put together?
Well, like I said, I as much as I tried to put it together to compete with other top decks, it's not something I would, throw into a Hall of Fame or anything like that. It's a really good orc deck. I will say that, but I must concede that, if you want to build it, there's at least 2 other decks that might be better than it, that won Worlds and came in second at Worlds.
Well, sure, but some people have a soft spot for the orcs, and some of us like Tyranids.
Yep. I don't know. For kind of dancing around this deck, what I would caution people on is obviously you don't want to commit too many of your, well, especially low HP units to the same planet. You're really just asking for that weird boy to join your little party. In addition, keeping the warlord, or I should say, yeah, keeping the orcs resource locked is also a really good play. Something I like to do, as an orc player playing this deck is I usually like to try to keep my opponents, locked one way or the other, but I tend to favor keeping them card locked. If I can keep them card locked and just strip away those shield cards, I mean, you win with this deck very simply if your opponent has no way to draw what they need. Usually after a planet or 2, you're going to have all your guys sitting in HQ, and it doesn't matter what, event or unit they're able to drop with 15 resources. You're probably going to win the game at that point. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got for newer players who want to try this deck out. Also, don't try not to rush first planet too much. I think there's good orc decks that do that. I don't feel this is necessarily a rush deck. especially with the cannons, even if your opponent wants to throw, a Void Pirate on planet 1, let him just cannon it. If he takes the planet, fine. If not, hey, make him use a shield card. But I think you can definitely win a long game with these guys. And once you have your support set up, I'll say my top 8 game, I'm looking at my supports right now. I had every single support in the game except my teleporter pad on the final planet, and I used every single one on planet 6 and 7. I mean, they are that important.
Yeah, well, I mean, the earlier you get cards like that into play, the more value they provide over the course of the game. Some of the photos I took of your HQ, people were just, shocked and delighted at just how
Oh,
incredibly full it was with
did you
supports.
get that for top 8?
Oh, yeah, at
Oh
least
my
I think
god.
so, but it
That
was just
was that was
absurd.
one of my, yeah, I I would like to also point out the 3 losses I had against Dark Eldar. To be completely truthful, Dark Eldar pretty much ran away with those games. Every other game that I won was pretty much a nail biter from start to finish. I had at least 3 games go to 7th planet. I had Dead Warlord. Most of my other games went to like 6th planet or time. Um, but it's yeah, it was very, very, I want to say, difficult to anticipate how how long these games would take. Like when I first put together the deck, I did not think, well, I'd be going to Planet 7 about every game, but that's pretty much what happened.
Well, I guess something else I'm kind of curious about is why did you ultimately pick on, Nazdreg as your chosen warlord as opposed to Zogwart? Like, was there ever any consideration thrown toward running our second orc warlord?
No. And that's the simplest answer I can give. No, I never thought Zogwart was going to be more competitive than Nazdreg. And like I said, I've ran with Nazdreg for so long. I've just kind of, learned through playing, through, just going through the motions, what feels good, what feels right, what planets I think I should win, which ones I can win, which ones I need to win, you know, and I don't think if I switched, Orc Warlords at the very end there, having zero Zogwart play experience under my belt, I'd be able to compete. So, I stuck with what I knew, and that was pretty much it. This is what I've known for the past year. And I don't say that to like intimidate or, disillusion people to think they can't play this faction or this deck. I mean, I want to see more people out there, smashing things up. Orcs are really, really fun to play, in my opinion. But this is, the culmination of an entire year where I had minimal experience outside of my faction, and 90% of my games were played with Nazdreg and with these units, and knowing what I'm capable of and what my limits are, and figuring out how to fine tune that and come up with something that might be, well, might have a little bit better shot at doing better in a competitive environment.
Sure. Well, I suppose, thank you so much for your time tonight, but just any final words of wisdom or advice for players trying to become more competitive, fare a little bit better in any kind of, tournament context?
Really play games. Don't drop. Don't, think that just because you've lost twice or three times that you need to quit. That certainly wasn't the attitude I went into Worlds with, especially after the first round. And, the more you play, the more you're going to understand what it is that, either causes you the loss or what you can do to better enjoy what it is you're doing. And the more you do it, the more you'll have fun with it, win or lose. If you saw my final match, I knew how Nazdreg was going to go out because that's the way I ended him so many games before. I'm going to go out on my terms. I'm going to Orc Cannon the planet. I'm going to walk away in pieces.
Right. Well, I suppose unless there's anything else you have to add, Elliott, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming on. Certainly it's a shame you didn't ultimately take the championship, but top 4 is absolutely incredible, and I'm sure people can't wait to see what's next in store for you. I suppose any plans for Worlds 2016?
I definitely want to attend 2016 Worlds. I don't know, I haven't planned yet what I'll be playing. It might be a new warlord. It might be a Tyrannid. We'll kind of see how this next cycle unfolds and go from there. But I can with most certainly tell you if I am at Worlds next year, it will be with one of those two factions, and I, again, will be playing with, the best competitive spirit I got available. I would like to say one more thing to Mitch before we take off here.
Yeah.
And that's just really a huge thanks. I played at many events in Worlds. I played in X-Wing. I played in Thrones Melee. I played in Conquest. Oh, God. I played so many, side events and just individual matches with people. I gotta say, the Conquest community as a whole at Worlds was unbelievable. These are some of the nicest, coolest guys I've ever met. There was almost zero stress in any of the games I played. Everyone was super friendly and just so nice. I've never, really had these experiences in, an event from start to finish. Every opponent I had was just amazingly open, kind, and willing to, understand that we're really here to play this awesome game. And yeah, I also would like to throw a quick thank you out there to a lot of the guys in my local meta. Marv, Brian, Evan, Sean, Tony, and of course Sam, every time he comes up and says hi to us. That's great. These are the guys who, I play Conquest with on a weekly basis and who really give me, the knowledge I needed in order to come to Worlds prepared and to thrive, because they know this game almost better than I do in the Orc realm, and definitely better than I do outside of it, because they play a lot more factions than I do. And, without their help and without them putting in some of the time before I went up there, I would have never done as well as I did. So, yeah, special thanks to those guys.
Well, I mean, like I said, it's just fantastic you did so well. Hats off to you once again for the just incredible sportsmanship on your part, and I definitely agree that this community is just fantastic. When I first got to the World Championship Center, I couldn't get in touch with the gentleman I was supposed to be staying at the very first night there, and somebody who I'd only known them by their Octagon username before, and he was just like, hey, you can stay in my guest bedroom. So So it's just, the generosity and camaraderie and kindness of this community is just, without rival so far as I've met anybody. So I was just very impressed by everybody's behavior at Worlds. There was nothing shady going on, which I appreciated. And, I just could not be happier with some of the players like you in our community. So, Elliott, thank you so much for coming on, and just have an incredible rest of your evening.
All right. Thank you much, Mitch.
Well, with our interview having drawn to a close, I'll just conclude this video by saying thank you once again for watching. Interacting with viewers like you will always remain the absolute highlight of my creating content for this channel, so please take a moment to let me know what you thought not just of this interview, but also what additional questions I could have asked or topics I could have discussed with Elliott. And as always, I remain ever open to constructive criticism. If you know someone that would make a good candidate to guest star in a future video or interview, you're encouraged to share. But with that said, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already, or if you are already subscribed, as ever, you're always encouraged to share this content, as the more likes, the more views these videos receive, the more likely people are to stumble upon this content, be exposed to Conquest, give the game a try, potentially join our community, and the more players we have, all the stronger the messages we send to Fantasy Flight Games to continue to support and to develop for this fantastic product. If at any point you'd like to get in touch with me, you're encouraged to do so through Twitter or on Facebook, and of course, if at any point you feel so inclined to help support the Hive Tyrant, I'd encourage you to check out my Patreon. But once again, thank you so much for watching, and as always, be sure to check back in again soon for ever more Conquest LCG content to come.